If you type German Fairytale Village into Google, from a top image result is this place. So for my last trip of 2023, I've headed to the medieval German walled city where it's always Christmas, Rothenburg ob der Tauber. In 1142, King Conrad III acquired the lands and village of Detwang from the Neumünster canons in Würzburg, and on a mountain spur built Rothenburg Castle. Next to his castle, a settlement was built, and due to its position high above the valley of the Tauber River, gained the name Rothenburg ob der Tauber, the closest English translation being Rothenburg upon Tauber. There is evidence that within 8 years King Conrad was staying in his castle, and as the settlement developed, it slowly gained importance. Just 30 years later, it received city rights from Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa, who was in the process of creating other cities on the eastern border of his Duchy of Swabia to protect the duchy against his enemies. At the same time, construction work started on the city walls, and the city took shape: the market, square, church, and both a Dominican and Franciscan monastery. As the city grew, so did the walls, more than doubling in length by the start of the 14th century, from 1,400 metres to 3,360 metres. On May the 15th, 1274, the castle was elevated to a free imperial city by King Rudolf of Habsburg, but within a century the castle had been either totally destroyed or at least badly damaged beyond repair by an earthquake. Today, all that remains of the castle of the free imperial city of Rothenburg is the layout of the Burggarten. The city continued to grow and develop, becoming an important trading city with merchants active in Italy and Prague. During this time, many of the major buildings, including the St. Jakobskirche and the older parts of the Rathaus, were built. Though the city walls still remained important, as the city was involved in numerous feuds with surrounding knights and other cities. The modern city archive keeps over 300 different feud letters. The glory days of the city came to a screeching halt at the start of the 30 Years' War in 1618. As an imperial city, it was obliged to be loyal to the Catholic Emperor Ferdinand II, but as a predominantly Protestant city, its sympathies laid with the Protestant side. In September 1631, King Gustav Adolf of Sweden defeated the imperial troops in the Battle of Breitenfeld and pushed further south, occupying Würzburg by October. The Catholic general, Count von Tilly, tried to build a new defensive line, putting Rothenburg, which was insignificant both military and politically, between the fronts. On October the 8th, the imperial garrison of Rothenburg surrendered to the Swedish troops without the need to besiege the city, with parts of the imperial troops mutinying and joining the Swedes. Count Tilly reached the area 2 weeks later with the main force of the Imperial Army, and on October 27th the City Council was asked by the Imperial Army to initiate surrender negotiations. The Council refused, and the Imperial troops closed a siege ring around the city on the 29th. The following day, shelling of the city began, and whilst defenders were able to inflict heavy casualties on the Imperial Army, the cause was lost when black powder stored in the Klingentor exploded. Just 5 months earlier, the army led by Tilly had taken the city of Magdeburg, and the massacre of around 20,000 citizens that had followed is considered to be the largest and worst of the entire 30 Years' War, causing horror throughout Europe at the time. Both the citizens of Rothenburg and Tilly were aware of the consequences of another army rampage through a defeated city. So as the imperial troops entered the city, the townspeople gathered in the market square to ask for mercy. Tilly, perhaps conscious of how Europe would have reacted to a second massacre, spared the city. However, after the devastations of the 30 Years' War, the city sank into an economic malaise, with development coming to a standstill and the city losing its importance. This is often given as a reason for why the city, its buildings and its walls are so well preserved. Without any development, nothing was pulled down, and without the need to expand beyond the walled city and widen roads, the walls were never demolished. From the 1880s onwards, painters, particularly of the late Romantic period, visited the city to paint the vistas and historic centre, and shortly afterwards the city started to become a tourist destination. In 1884, the first building took place outside the city walls. By the start of the 20th century, Rothenburg had become a popular destination for tourists from the UK and France. Before the First World War, excursion buses carrying members of high-class society were regularly arriving in the city. As war clouds gathered over Europe, the city shifted to the right, and in elections in March 1933, the Nazi Party achieved an 80% share of the vote. Anti-Semitic attacks occurred in the city, and shortly before Kristallnacht, the last 17 remaining Jews living in Rothenburg were expelled from the city. On October the 22nd, the synagogue was looted and destroyed. Despite that, the city passed through the war largely unscathed until the night of March the 31st, 1945, when a US bombing raid destroyed around 38% of the buildings in the newer eastern part of the city, though the historic core was left unscathed. In 1950, the Romantische Straße, or Romantic Road, was founded as a travel route designed to encourage tourism through Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg. Starting by the Main in Würzburg, in the shadow of the Festung Marienburg, and heading south to end the Abbey of St. Stephen in Thussen, under the shadow of Neuschwanstein Castle. The route passes directly through Rothenburg, ensuring it's placed on the tourist itinerary of millions each year. One of the main attractions are the city walls, which form an almost complete ring around the city, taking advantage of the geography of the land to use both man-made and natural defences, with the northern and eastern sides of the city protected by high walls topped with walkways to protect from the flatter lands, whilst the south and west the land drops sharply away to the valley of the river Tauber, with its cliffs topped with walls providing defence of the city centre. Along the walls there are several gates into the city, but perhaps the most impressive is the Spitaltor, which protects the route in from the south. A massive construction of multiple bastions protecting a winding roadway through the various structures, guarded at the city end by the Spitalturm and heading east and north for high city walls. You can head inside the fortifications of the Spitaltor and descend down multiple levels until you reach the moat level deep below the roadways, forming an impressive barrier to anyone wanting to avoid the gates. You can also walk through the walls of the Spitaltor to the front of the fortification, looking over the entranceway and seeing the multiple places you'd have had control over the roadway and anything or anyone passing through it. Beyond the Spitaltor, as the walls turn north again up the western side of the city, they take advantage of the hills and cliffs of the Tauber Valley to do a lot of the hard work, topping the already steep cliffs with lower walls and towers, high above the land outside, but much closer to ground level inside the city itself. Due to the shape of the city, with the walls stretching south on a long, thin spit of land, these parts of the walls also provide some of the best views back towards the city centre and the site of that original Rothenburg castle. The western entrance to the city, the Tor, forming one of the great picturesque reveals as you walk along the walls, as well as one of the towers, albeit from the other side, that feature on all those pictures of the city. From the Tor round through the Burggarten and back along the western side of the city, the walls remain low if you're inside the city, as the steep cliffs of the promontory take on the work of protecting the former imperial castle. Back round to the north of the city, the walls need to rise in height again as they face the flatter lands, starting at the Klingentor, the site of the explosion that in some ways helped to preserve the city in its historic state. Whilst not as impressive as the Spitaltor, the entrance into the city here is through a series of winding paths designed to prevent a quick route into attack. And once through the gate, stairs help you ascend back onto the walls to complete the more than 3-kilometre circuit round the fortifications of the city, back to the Röderturm at the Röderbastei. Throughout the year, the Röderturm is open to ascend, and from the top of the tower, some 100 steep steps up from the wall walk, you can take in the views along the walls and across the city. Back down at ground level and heading down Rödergasse from the Röderturm brings you to the Markusturm, one of the inner towers of the city. Beyond the main market square is the Grüner Markt, which for time of visiting in December hosted a large number of the stalls of the city's Christmas market. In the neighbouring Kirchplatz, around the St. Jakobskirche, is a model of the city, showing the layout of the city fortifications, towers, and all the buildings inside the city walls. Towering over the model and the square is the Church of St. Jacob itself. A short walk away and you reach the former Dominican convent, which was founded back in 1258. The convent was in use by the order up until 1554 and then went through various uses until the building was adapted to become a new home for the city's museum, which was outgrowing its existing premises, in 1936. Parts of the original convent remain, including the kitchens, which date back to 1262 and is considered one of the oldest of its kind in Germany. Whilst remodelled and renovated many times over the centuries, the buildings still retain many of their features of a religious building, including the large cloister at the heart of the building, off of which there are several exhibition spaces. The museum's main aim is to tell the history of the city, containing around 30,000 objects, including paintings, sculptures, and weapons. The collection originally being started towards the end of the 19th century by the trades associations of the city, who were concerned that the city's cultural assets were being sold off and some of the city's history was in danger of being lost. Antique fairs were regularly being held in town to sell items to wealthy American and British tourists, and the founding of the museum was designed to show that this wasn't appropriate. After occupying various buildings and locations across the city, the collection was finally pulled together in the converted convent. short distance away from the former Dominican convent are the buildings of the Rothenburg Knights Commandery, which were built, along with the neighbouring St John's Church, between 1393 and 1410. Since 1977, it's been home to the Medieval Crime Museum. The museum can trace its history back to the end of the 19th century and the small private collection of instruments of torture that publisher and archivist Rudolf Hermann Albrecht had gathered together as the so-called Rothenburg torture chamber. People have been pandering to tourists' more lurid fascinations for far longer than we're all willing to admit. Since the 1950s, the remit of the museum has expanded to look more at the history of law and justice in the German-speaking regions, placing the torture devices in context of how they fitted into crime and punishment of the era. But that doesn't stop the main draw being the collection of racks, iron maidens, stocks, pillories, shame masks and more that paint the more gruesome image of medieval justice. There's even a small diorama showing a typical market scene, complete with shame punishments being enacted. But the museum the city is now most famous for is perhaps one of the newest, opening in 2000 in the shop of Café Wohlfahrt, the Deutsches Weinhnachtsmuseum, or German Christmas Museum. Café Wohlfahrt was founded by Wilhelm and Café Wohlfahrt in 1964 in Herrenberg, southwest of Stuttgart, originally selling music boxes at weekly markets before expanding their ranges to include more Christmas-related products. In 1977, the company moved from Herrenberg to Rothenburg, opening the first specialist shop for Christmas items, allowing tourists and locals to purchase Christmas decorations, music boxes and all other possible Christmas-related paraphernalia all year round, helping to give the city the impression of it always being Christmas in Rothenburg. Above the sales floor, the small museum tells the story of how Christmas is celebrated in the German-speaking world. From the first cribs, Christmas trees and wooden decorations through to the creation of delicate glass baubles of different shapes and design. Initially exclusively made in the small German town of Lauscha, right up until the 1880s, when an American, one Frank Winfield Woolworth, discovered the Lauscha baubles during a visit to Germany and brought them back to sell in his eponymous 5 and dime stores stateside. Of course, the best time to visit the Christmas Museum is during December, when you can step out of the museum into the market square and get hit by the full effect of the city's Christmas market, complete with bands playing carols from the balcony of the town hall. The city is crowded as a tourist destination all year round, with the Plönlein area, the most photographed, busy all the time. But most visitors are day trippers on coach tours from Frankfurt, Munich, Nuremberg or Würzburg. And once the coaches have started their journeys back up the Autobahn, the city returns to the still and quiet that it's inhabited since the noise and confusion of the 30 Years' War faded away nearly 400 years ago. Even stiller and quieter as night descends, almost most Christmassy of cities. Rothenburg is at the end of a short branch line from the Würzburg to Ansbach railway at Steinach. There are connections at Ansbach to Nuremberg and Stuttgart, and at Würzburg to Frankfurt. Nuremberg and Stuttgart airports offer connections across Europe, with Stuttgart providing links year-round and Nuremberg more focused on seasonal links. Frankfurt is the main international airport for Germany and a hub for flag carrier Lufthansa, with connections across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia and North and South America.